So a very good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for attending this training session for the Pearson Edexcel International A-Level Mathematics. Now, we do know that some may be logging in from various locations, so a very good morning or good afternoon, depending on your location. My name is Sweeva, and I am the Standardization Officer assigned today. Feel free to call me Swee for short if it's easier. Now, my role today is to supervise and support in terms of the use of the Zoom platform today. So if anybody does have any questions on how to use Zoom or they're not sure of certain functions, please send me a message in the Zoom chat. Oh, I do apologize for that. Once you've sent me a message in the Zoom chat, I will respond to you there. Now, keep in mind that in terms of materials for this training session, materials have been provided and you can locate them within the resources feature of Zoom. So if I just have everybody's attention and can direct everybody to the bottom toolbar of the Zoom, if you should see an icon titled resources. If you click on that, a side box or pop-up box will appear. It will be the resources feature. Under resources, you will see 3 tabs: links, documents, and speakers. You can ignore speakers, but click on this middle tab, which says documents. Once you select that, you will see 2 PDF documents, the delegate booklet, as well as the aggregation rules and guidance PDF. Please download both those individual documents, those 2 PDFs, to your individual computers or devices. Keeping in mind that if you have an issue with downloading those individual documents, you can click on the other tab to just on the left of documents, which says links. If you click in the resources feature, if you click on the tab that says links, there is a pop-up box that says event materials. Click now. And what that will do is that will automatically take you to a WeTransfer web page where you can download a zip pack of those 2 PDF documents if you are unable to download them individually and directly from Zoom. However, as we know that sometimes there can be further issues, in the Zoom chat, I am just going to also type in a direct link to the WeTransfer webpage, where you can also copy and paste that hyperlink or open the hyperlink directly to open a link to the WeTransfer page to download that zip pack of the 2 documents. Okay, and as I've said, as a reminder that since this training session is being recorded, please be mindful that if the presenter encourages any comments or questions via the microphone, and if you do use your microphone, please remember that anything you do say is going to be recorded. So just please be mindful to maintain a level of professionalism during this training session. Okay, and obviously if we do take any breaks throughout the training session, you are more than free to use the reactions feature of Zoom, where you can give emoji indications of if you're away or back, or if you agree or disagree with green ticks or red crosses or thumbs up, or have hands raised for any comments or questions as well. All right, so that's my part done, but I can now hand over to our presenter, Melius Michael, to go over the session for us.
On behalf of Pearson, I'd like to welcome you all on this second module of this training course on the International A-Level Mathematics. If you were with me on the first module, you would be aware of a few of the things I will start talking about, but I'll start introducing myself. My name is Melius Michael. I am one of the credible specialists of Pearson. I've been working with them since 2015 on a lot of the changes in terms of both GCSEs and A-levels, international, as well as in the UK-based ones. As well as being a credible specialist, I'm a maths A-level and GCSE student, teacher, and I'm also an assistant head teacher at the school in Birmingham in the UK. If you do hear any background noise for a few minutes, it's probably because I am based in the school right now and there is a transition between classes. So apologies for any of the noises. Hopefully they'll be in the classrooms and working very shortly. Now, to start with, as I said, I am working on behalf of Pearson, so I'd like to just give you, I'll start by telling you the agenda. And on the agenda, there's some welcoming introduction, both in terms of the Pearson as a company, as well as what we are about to do today. Apologies for everyone who was here for the first module. There'll be a few slides that I'm repeating because we have 1 or 2 people who weren't with us on that one, and then we'll go straight to the main points of the agenda. As you can see, after the introduction, we are referring to the assessment objectives of the International A-Level. We are going to look at the details of those, how an exam paper is structured based on those assessment objectives, how they influence the structure of it, as well as the grade boundaries, the mark schemes. And then from that, how the difficulty of the questions as well are influenced by those assessment objectives, the consistency between them in each paper, and what the inconsistencies are. And then finally finish with the support for exam preparation. At any point, if you'd like to ask me any question, please use the chat. I will try and answer at the most appropriate time. If I can answer at that point, I will be then sharing the maths team. There's a group of us that work on behalf of Pearson that can come back to you. As for certificates, the certificate should come out to you after both modules have been completed. I had someone already mentioning about the name. I will pass on that information to the team as well, so that they can correct it as well for you. If any other question, there will be a question and answer section at the very end of the training as well. We have a series of small activities, so please, as you heard earlier on, if you could download the resources, the delegate booklet, you will find the questions. It will be difficult to show you all the necessary information for the activities on the one slide. So there is a booklet to download with activities, and I will be referring to them. So please, if you haven't printed them, if you can at least download them so you can access that. The delegate booklet is a document that looks like this one here. So you should, I'm just pushing it now. You should see it on your screens, with a series of activities that I will refer to, and I'll give you a few minutes to go through that. That will then also give you that exposure and experience to deal with the assessment objectives. And then you can maybe refer to those during your lessons with your students in your departments, but as well as when you choose questions to give in your for worksheets, for homeworks, for in-class exercises, but as well as assessments, you can be mindful of those assessment objectives so that your mocks or your papers that you produce have a similar weight to the real papers as well. And I'm referring to when you do a bespoke worksheet, homework, or paper for mocks, not when you're downloading or using past papers. So the objectives then of today, sorry, pardon me, give me 1 second. So the assessment objectives for today are to understand the assessment objectives for the qualification, understand the question types of the qualification, the mark schemes behind the qualifications, practice using the mark schemes and making sure that we're aligned with how the examiners would use them as well, and looking at exemplar student work. And as I've mentioned in module 1, you could download your own exemplars from your own scripts, and I'll come back to you. I'll mention this at the end in the support section. And then finally, make sure that you're up to date with the support materials. And at that point, if you watched us in the first module, some of it will be very similar and relevant to that. So it's up to you if you want to listen to it, if you have questions at the end. They're very similar, but I will be then referring to the assessment objectives and how that's relevant to the support materials and websites that I mentioned. So to make a start, I said I'll have to mention a few things about Pearson for people or delegates who weren't here in the first session. So apologies again if you heard this in our first module. It'll be a repeat, but it'll be quite fast. So just the background of Pearson. We are the world's leading learning company, and the UK's largest awarding organisation, best placed to provide qualifications aligned to the British educational system. The heritage stretches back over 150 years. And today we partner with schools, universities, and employers worldwide, offering the world-class global recognized qualifications to over 3.5 million students a year. You can see some more facts on the side there of the screen. So we've got 6,500 schools. We mark over 10 million exam scripts on behalf of the UK Department for Education each year, and we operate in 70 countries worldwide. We now start on the main point, which is the assessment objectives, and we'll be looking at those. In your delegate booklet, there's a detailed description of them, and you can have a look, but I'll mention them just very briefly in the coming slides as well. So the specification is described by the content. So when we say content, it's what is to be learned. What do we expect our students to learn? And by the assessment objective, the assessment objectives kind of test what the students has to do to demonstrate the learning. So with that, we want the demonstration. With the specification shows the content of it. The content differs for each module of the International A-Level Mathematics course. The assessment objectives span through each module, although the number of marks allocated for each assessment objective differs from module to module. And I'll explain a bit more why that's the case as we look at how the distribution of those marks are allocated. When we talk about content, and you can see that on the screen here, so the assessment objectives are about presenting evidence of that content that had to be learned. The left box shows some words which describe the content of the International A-Level Mathematics, whereas the right box here describes how we expect students to demonstrate their ability. I'll give you a minute there to read a few of the examples there. Now, as I mentioned, the assessment objectives are written in detail in your booklets, but just to summarize, the first one is about recalling, selecting, and using knowledge of mathematical facts, concepts, and techniques. The second one is about constructing rigorous mathematical arguments and proof. It's about that reasoning as well. And the constructions of extended arguments for handling substantial problems in an unstructured form. Now, we will explore a bit more what that means as we go into the activities later on. The third objective is about recall, selecting, and using knowledge of standard mathematical models to represent situations in real life. So we see that modeling of the actual maths the procedures that we teach. Number 4 is comprehend translations of common realistic context into mathematics and interpreting results. And finally, the fifth objective is about using contemporary calculated technology and other permitted resources. So we've got 5 assessment objectives. And like I said, if you go into activity 2 of your within your booklet, you'll get a bit slightly more detail. Sorry, it's a bit blurred here because of the background, but you'll get a sheet here with a slightly more detailed explanation of what the 5 assessment objectives are. But to summarize them even further, just to help you remember what they all mean, so that when we come to an activity and looking at the papers and how they lie underneath those questions, a quick way of remembering those are the following. So assessment objective is about just doing the maths. Assessment objectives 2 is about showing. So you'll have different ways of showing it through a reasoning statement or through a series of arguments that come to a conclusion. And so proof showing kind of questions. Number 3 is about model it. So when you have those more wordy problems, the real life kind of scenarios. Number 4 is about interpretation. So when you have to interpret some sort of a graph or maybe perhaps a coefficient or the in terms of a context as well of a problem. Number 5 is about calculating something, and then whether that's with a calculator or whether any other type of resource with tables or anything else, that's where the marks are given. So do it, show it, model it, interpret it, and calculate it. I will do a scribble somewhere if you have access to a pen and paper there, just so that it helps you then remember when we come to the activities later on. So I'll give you just 30 seconds to just do a scribble of those kind of titles for each assessment objective for you. So let's have a look at an example here and start to discuss about where the assessment objectives are and which ones are applied to the questions that we talk about. So here's the first one here. So this one here is from the International Mathematics. We have 5 objectives we said. So given that y equals 4x squared minus 3 over root x, find dy dx. I've just seen a message about the booklet 1. I'll see if I can get the link to you for the first module as well. If not, I'll give you the email later on. But we'll do that towards the end. So now, as you can see from this example here, we have an assessment objective 2 comes in, the length scenario. So apologies. So this is an assessment objective 1. That's asking you to just do the maths. Another question, that's assessment objective 2. So if we have the lengths in centimeters of two shorter sides of a right angle triangle, here, as you can see there, show that the length in centimeters of the longest side is 2√3. The word show, or another word show or prove, are generally linked to assessment objective 2. So that's a rule of thumb that when you see a show or a prove kind of, it's most likely an assessment objective 2 question. That's one way of indicating and seeing that. If we move to another example here, sorry. In this example, we have show that we have an identity, trigonometric identity. And again, it's a show that, as you can see. And that's another assessment objective 2 question. Now, as we can see here, it says, have a think about what kind of steps that the students would need to actually come to showing that identity. So have a think about the different steps and different ways of showing this. I've had a question before. Do we just start from the left-hand side and go to the right-hand side? What is your experience with your students? How would they tackle this? Can I just give you an opportunity here? Just put some ideas in the chat there. What would you encourage your students to do? How would they approach this? If anyone would like to even contribute either through the chat, you can also unmute at this point here if that's easier. So I'm just having here some people who've mentioned in direct messages here before. Some of them will simplify the left-hand side. Yep, so I have here an example, express cos 2x and sin 2x first. Yep, so you start from the left-hand side, start to express those, and then move yourself to the right-hand side. Some simplify the right-hand side and come towards the left-hand side, and some do a bit of both. But if you do a bit of both, I would also encourage the students to finish with a concluding statement to say that because the left-hand side and the right-hand side now equals to therefore proven. So if you do have, if you do their work on both sides, make sure they have a statement afterwards as well. If we have a look at another example. So here's another example here. And this is an assessment objective 3. You can see some kind of model, some kind of a real life, or trying to apply this in a real life context. So the population, P millions of a country, is given by that equation where T is the time in years, write down the initial population. Now, assessment objective 3 is not just about population changes though. We have other examples from Pure 2, such as modeling investments. Now in this one here, you could adapt this question and actually assess more skills. So other further questions you could do about this, you can ask about the rate of growth when T equals 10. Or you could ask the minimum value of P. Or you can even ask them to sketch the graph of PA against time, population against time. So, and when you do choose a question, it's nice to think of other questions to throw in from experience. So it's worth, as you look at the different questions, you can create a whole activity from this. So being aware of those follow-up questions as well, you are then taking a question like this, which is an assessment objective 3, and then asking different questions from this. I'm having some contributions there as well in the chat. Thank you. I'll ask for the materials if I can just have some support and maybe show that share that link again for the resources, please. That's a WeTransfer link as well that you can click and download that. And perhaps we can send you an email as well, but I'll do that later on for you. If we then move on to a different example, just to see how in one question you can have more than one assessment objective. So here's an example there. So in this case here, we have an assessment objective 1 as well as an assessment objective 4 in the same question. Now, the assessment objective 4 there, even though it's about interpreting extended arguments. So in part B here, especially with our word hence implies interpret. So you've done something of assessment objective 1. You've just done something, and then now you interpreted what you've done here into to that part B there. If errors are made in part A, it's still possible to get marks in part B, and that they're the follow-through marks, which we'll see later on, and they're given because the assessment objective there is an interpret objective, which is the assessment objective 4. So if you are showing that you can access that, then you deserve marks. So it's not just about doing it, because of the emphasis being the interpretation there. That's how, and that's why the follow-through marks are applied. If we look at an assessment objective 5 example now in the next slide. So in this case here, where we said that, we want to use calculators in order to work this out, that's a sensible use of calculator here, or a use of the formula booklet. So again, that's what we mean by other resources as well, and hence why this is an assessment objective 5 question. Now, note that only one of the values is required to be calculated there. And that's because if you can do that when you're demonstrating that you can apply that assessment objective. And that's now, if you wanted practice with this within your class, you could then omit more of those values and get them to practicing in that. But in terms of an exam question, if they can apply it in one, there's no need to keep awarding the marks for the same kind of skill. Now, we did mention earlier on that assessment objectives could differ between the different modules, and they'll have different weights, and I'll explain why as we look at them. So let's have a look at the assessment objectives differ between the different units. So as you can see, this two-way table here, we've got the assessment objectives 1 to 5 at the top, and we have P1 to P4. So we just look at the pure for now and seeing how those differ. Now, all figures in the above table are expressed as a mark out of 75. Now, you'll notice that P2 to P4 are all the same. So at least 55 out of the 75 marks for assessment objective 1 and objective 2 are on P1, whereas there's 50 out of 75 on the rest of the units. And that's mainly because, and that's deliberate, because in P1, we want to ensure that there's a transition from GCSE to A levels. So we are giving them more chances to assess, do you know it, do it in different cases. Whereas as they move to P2 to P4, we want a bit more weight on the other assessment objectives because we want to see more application of it as well. Now, if you look at the applied ones here on the next slide, so we have M1, M2, S1, S2, and D1. Again, they're out of 75, as you can see here. So I'll give you a few seconds to study this. And you can see, again, they differ a bit more from between assessment objective 1 and 5. I'm just asking if anyone wants to comment here. Are you surprised by the way that the assessment objectives are weighted in either the pure or the miss, or is an expectation? Another person could also argue here. You could also mention if you agree or disagree with the way that they're weighted like this. And again, any feedback is worth sharing with us because we always review how the assessments are created. And the way that the assessment objects, as you'll see later on, make a paper more accessible or not. And the demand, as we'll say, or mention earlier on, is affected by the way that the assessment objectives are placed. Now, I'd like you to have a think now, as we saw. So I'm going to go back to those examples again before I come to the next activity. So as you saw here, we had an example of an assessment objective 1 in the first one, assessment objective 2 in the second one there. I'll just wait give a second for the slides to match with my voice. Then you have here, and on this slide here, we have an assessment objective 2 because of the show that. In this one here, we had an assessment objective 3, and we talked about how we can have different questions that come in to assess the different skills, but it's linking to that real life example. And then we came to this one here where we saw a combination of an assessment objective 1 in part A, so you can have different parts between part A and part B, to then an interpretation in the second one. And then finally, an assessment objective 5 example was here with this example. And the reason why I went back to those, just to remind you of the examples, is because that takes us nicely to the activity 1, which we'll need our delegate booklet. So activity 1, we have 2 questions taken from the recent Pure 1 paper. We'd like you to make a judgment about the assessment objectives and how they should be assigned for each question. The mark schemes and the summary of the assessment objectives are available to help you. And then a complete mark scheme is also there as well. And marks will be shared anonymously with them in the meeting later on. So I'll give you an opportunity to share that. So if you look at activity 1, I'll put the questions on the screen as well for you to have a look at. So here's the booklet that you should download from either the WeTransfer or the resources section of Zoom. So here are the 2 questions. So in this case here, so you have got a question 6 and a question 7, and then followed through by the mark scheme. So you can have a look at how the marks are allocated. And then here's the detailed assessment objectives I mentioned below. And then here is then a table where you can decide how many of marks you would give for each of those questions to each assessment objective. So I'm going to give you about 8 minutes to contemplate within that. Feel free to chat between you as well if you want to discuss this while you're doing this through the chat. I'll be in the background as well. I'll try and answer any questions that you've sent me as well during those 8 minutes. So I'll say up till 41 within the time here. If you could try that, and then we'll discuss and I'll share the responses as well. So if anyone wants to send me a direct message, you can. If anyone wants to send to everyone else as well, any comments on this, please do. So have a look at those 2 questions and think about how many marks were allocated for each assessment objective. I'll be in the background. I'll give another 2-3 minutes for you just to conclude, and then we'll carry on. Could I just encourage you to just give us a thumbs up if you are ready to move on? Just looking at everyone. So a thumbs up if you're ready. Some people are sharing their answers, which is great. Again, feel free to do the same. So if I put the delegate booklet, well, here we go. If I put the delegate booklet here, so we can see the questions as well. So question 6 here, 2 parts, out of 7 marks. Now I've seen different people saying assessment objective 1 and 2. Some have given a 3 as well. Some have said 5 in this case. Now there is some leeway in the assigning of assessment objectives to the questions. And again, that's because of the interpretation of different people. But and I'll show you how examiners put together paper based on that. But again, we have some leeway with this. So it's not a correct, this is the right answer necessarily, but this is what information we have for this. For the part A, where it's asking you to find the value of C, I'm just making sure you can see, yep. For part A, we have 2 marks out of the 4 are given for an assessment objective 1, because it's just doing it. And then you got followed by 2 marks of assessment objective 2, where you're kind of showing it. So they haven't assigned modeling, interpreting, or calculating in this case, in the way of doing that. The next part for part B, hence find the coordinates of the point of intersection. In this way here, you've got 3 marks. There's a 1 mark allocated for doing it, following the instruction. And you notice here there's a hence, which implies interpretation, like I mentioned during the slides. So the remaining 2 marks are in assessment objective 4. So once again, for part A, 2 marks for assessment objective 1, 2 marks for assessment objective 2. For part B, 1 mark for assessment objective 1, and then 2 marks for assessment objective 4. If we look at question 7, this one here, the first part there says, find the area of the sector, giving your answer to 1 decimal place. And again, thank you for everyone who's contributing and giving their suggestions on the group chat. And I have here, we can see some of you are saying assessment objective 1, 2, 4, and 5. Others are just saying 1, 2, and 5. So the way that for what we have here, what they've said for the first part, 2 marks are a do it again, because you're having to show your skills of doing that. Followed by 1 mark of assessment objective 5, as you would have to use the calculator or any means like that to do it. For part B, find the size of the angle, giving us 3 decimal places. 1 mark was allocated to assessment objective 1, 1 for that one. We've got 3 marks. 1 was for objective 2 and 1 for objective 5 in this case. And then finally, the last one, hence find the find the perimeter of the shape, giving your answer to 1 decimal place. Now, this is here where we have 2 marks for assessment objective 2 and 2 for objective 5. But however, because of that hence word, there's some justification for assigning some marks for assessment objective 4 as well for that part C. So you could argue in that case that they're not both marks assessment objective 5, but there is a mark for objective 4. And those are the arguments and decisions they need to make when making that. So if we follow the rule of thumb of that one, then the hence would go with assessment objective 4. Not every question needs, if you remember back to the examples I showed earlier on, so if you go back to this one here, the first question there that I have doesn't have a show it, it's just a do it. So that's an objective 1 in this case here. So it depends on how lengthy the question is, and then you'll have that. But, and again, in terms of P1, there'll be a lot more just do it, because of that transition from GCSE, as I mentioned earlier on. So this then takes us, just as I mentioned, just to understand how a mark scheme as well as a paper is developed. Have a look at a blank assessment grid like this one here. So we've done it for 2 questions. Imagine doing it for a full paper, and trying their best to fit in with this grids here. So if you take one here, so a full paper requires the most of the content is covered, and then the sum of the marks allocated to each assessment objective on the paper to lie within those totals that we allow. So we have to do it's almost like a 2-way table, the content coverage as well as the weighting for each one. Okay, and this one here that you're seeing is from a recent paper too. So that can be quite challenging, which is why sometimes people argue about the demand of the question as the weighting goes slightly different between paper to paper. But they have to try and match that. So fit in with the specification, fit in with the totals that you can see at the bottom there. And then if we look at the next one there, if we move to this, how you can take a question and change the assessment objective just by adapting the question slightly. So if you look at this question here, so you take a question like this, and we do that in our lessons as well. We take it and we start to adapt it. We ask slightly different questions. And that's to suit the teaching that we want to, the lesson objectives that we want to actually achieve, but also trying to gauge where our students are, challenge them or support them necessarily. But that's something to be aware of as we change the questions and the parts of the questions, whether we do more leading parts or whether we then change the assessment objectives. And a lot of the times you'll find that if you're supporting them, you're then kind of doing the interpretation for them, and you're moving from an assessment objective 4 to an assessment objective 1, or you're moving from assessment objective 2 to straight to 1, because you are then trying to make it more accessible for them. But bear in mind that as they come towards their exams, you have to train them to be able to access the different assessment objectives themselves. Looking at this specific example here, If you have a quick read so you know what we're referring to, so I'll give you 30 seconds for that. So in this case here, this is mainly an assessment objective 4, and that's because they're having to interpret this and access the actual problem. But if I start adapting the questions at the bottom, we then change it. And if you are aware of the bronze, silver, gold sheets that we have on the Emporium website, the bronze and silver questions, and I'm referring to the ones that you have. The gold questions are basically the same style questions as you would have on an exam paper, but then the silver and bronze kind of scaffolded by breaking it down into more sections, and we're leading one. The more you do that, the more it then becomes, you change the assessment objectives and you end up with assessment objective 1 and 2. So bear that in mind. But that's also a way of training and supporting your students. So the end goal is to get them to the gold standard, but you can use it. So in this case here, the way that I could adapt this, but bear in mind that we're changing and moving away from this, is this one here. So the altered lines are in blue. So in figure 3, ACD is a straight line. That wasn't written like that earlier on. And find the nearest meter, the perimeter of the triangle. So what we've done here by altering it, this changes the question to assessment objective 1 in part A and assessment objective 2 in part B. Can we understand though why it's assessment objective 1 and not 2? If anyone would like to comment on this on the chat. And again, we could even go further and saying to them more, and if I wanted to make this into a bronze kind of version of this, we could say, yeah, it's a just do it, thank you. We could just say find angle, let's say BCD, then angle CBD, or find angle, use cosine rule in the triangle. So you could add more comments and more steps. However, yes, we are assessing those skills. Yes, we are getting them more fluent with that, but we are changing the fact that we changed the question, the weight of the assessment objectives have changed, and then there is a question mark whether the students would actually access the real problem with those. So our aim is, if we do adjust this, that we get them to that level eventually. Okay, so it's a transition, and that's why it's important to apply, to apply the skills as well. Thank you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the weight of the assessment objectives, as you can see with this question, changes and affects the demand of the question. And that takes us to the next slide here, which I'll read for you and explain a bit more. So producing the finished draft of the paper requires a lot of skill to set the questions so that the assessment objective marks told us agree, so within that grid that you saw earlier on, both across rows and columns, because we need to make sure that we cover the specification areas as well as the weighting of the assessment objectives. The other factor which has to be considered is the demand. What cognitive skills are required to do each question? You change the demand, the cognitive skills are changed as well. Roughly speaking, the less structure in a question and the greater number of steps required to complete it, the more demanding it is. So if you require more steps, but you actually have it more unstructured, so it's a more open question at the top, that's a more it requires more demand. We're talking about different assessment objectives. You break it down for them, you're accessing assessment objective 1 and 2 more, but it lowers the demand of the question as well. Also important is how familiar the question is likely to be to the student. Is this a similar question to the past papers? Is it something that's coming up quite often? That changes the demand as well, because they're more familiar with it. Linked to both of the above is the fact that the student may have to devise their own strategy. So which techniques to use may not be immediately apparent. So if they can't, if they have to think and put together a strategy, that changes the demand as well. And that's something for them to consider. So just to demonstrate what I mean by that a bit further, and without going much into the actual question, have a look at the next question on the slide here. So that's from a recent M1 paper. This is an unstructured question. It's worth 7 marks. Structure enables us to ask further questions and alter the assessment objectives. It usually means less AO2 and more AO1s. So, for example, here we could say part A, show that the normal component of the reaction of the surface on the particle is, and leave part B, the question itself. So by adding those extra bits there, we're changing the assessment objectives, we're making it more accessible, we're building, and there is worth doing that because you build confidence in your students as well. But you need to then eventually get them to this level here as they will be assessed on those. So now that you're a bit more familiar, hopefully, with the assessment objectives of how the grid against specifications and how the different weighting affects the different demand of the questions, then let's see how that affects the grade boundaries. So if we look at this grid, the following grid here for the different grades from an A star to an E, against the different modules. It says also for an examination with the 5 grades per paper, the demand must be such that each paper is accessible at the low end and challenging enough for the upper end. The table shows the marks needed in June 2023. The UMS correspond to grades A to E are 80 to 40. And I'll explain what we mean by that as well. So grade boundaries are corresponding UMS, and we mentioned this in module 1. So accessible at the lower end, 40% of the marks should be given to that. And then to get an A, you'll have to drop very few marks, so about 15 or so, and that's to make it more challenging at the top. An A star, as you can see, is a word for getting at least 480 UMS marks, and so on. Now, the raw marks are low here in some cases, as you can see, and that's possibly a reflection of the disruption of teaching through COVID and the courses being new. And eventually, we'd like to see a shift of these marks as the students have less gaps in their teaching and are more familiar of the new course as well. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, how do we award marks? So there's a purpose of the mark scheme, and we try to be quite strict with that when we mark with it. And I've mentioned in the module 1 as well how the questions are split to different examiners and they have to follow that. And if there's an issue, they'll then raise it to a team leader who then look into it as well. And then we also have quite a bit of quality assurance before you get the final papers, the results back. But however, and it's important to follow a mark scheme because it enables partial or full success to be rewarded. We ensure consistency between the different markers and ourselves as teachers, and to ensure consistency from one exam session to the next. Now, there's also other reasons which are more practical. A lot of the marking is done in a short time. So we need to have a clear mark scheme so that we get the examiners actually mark it as quickly as possible, get it back so that we can meet then the deadlines, the quality assurance, and present the results within the results days, as you know, in the summer term. Now, one other thing that we need to talk about, each question is given a number of marks according to the amount of work required to do. Marks are allocated according to which assessment objectives the question is testing. And the mark scheme is then constructed so that the marks are accumulated as the student progresses through the solution of the questions. And that's, you think of it as an accumulation within that. And that's because of the nature of the maths problems themselves. So the accumulation is natural. Possibly not the same in other qualifications like in English, but with maths, as you solve the problem, you should expect that accumulation as well. Now, if you've been marking yourselves, or for your students, or if any of you are examiners, you will be familiar with some of the different types of marks. We have the M marks, the A marks, and the B marks. And you can see here that the M marks are appropriate for method marks, using the correct way. Last time we also talked about, and I'll come back to the D marks, which I'll mention in the following slide. A marks for accurate answers, which are conditional to a correct method being used, and B marks are unconditional accuracy marks. So they don't depend on other methods. And the other thing I wanted to mention on this case here, M mark is a correct method mark, and it doesn't have to lead to a fully correct expression. And we mentioned this in module 1. Now, for M marks, it is often a guidance for how to reward a student who tries to use a method but not fully correctly. For example, in integrating a polynomial, the M mark is usually awarded if the powers of x are increased by 1. For example, in solving a quadratic using the formula, sign errors are not penalized for the M mark. And again, those are just some examples from a P1 and the mark scheme. Now, I did mention earlier on about the D mark, the M. It denotes a method mark, which is dependent on a previous M mark. And sometimes if you don't show that previous mark, you won't get this either. And then the next one should really say FT there. FT means to follow through. And I used to denote where an incorrect answer can be used in a subsequent part and still be awarded marks. Okay. Usually there are conditions attached to the following through, and you can see them in the notes sections at the bottom of the mark scheme for each question there. Now we have an example here. Now I would like you to look at the wording quite closely here. This is from January 23, from paper 2, but it says here, solutions based entirely on calculated technology are not acceptable. And they've added more and more of these because there's a larger use of graphic calculators within the exam, where you can get some of the scientific calculators, where you can actually get the answers quicker without showing any methods. This one here for the format, it's encouraging you to show some of those steps here. And some of those steps that we would be expecting them on the next slide. So we would want to see, for example, here, something like the -2/5 on there, then the inverse of it here before they come to their conclusion with the answer. So by omitting this, there's a bit of a there's an issue there, and the risk not getting any marks. So make a note when you see those kind of wordings, like in the previous question about the calculator technology here. They need to show the marks, and I keep emphasizing that in my own classes as well. This takes us to our next activity. Can I give you 2 minutes, and I'll stop talking here so I can give you a chance to type as well. Suggest some types of questions where working must be shown because the issues overuse of a calculator. So what, from your own experience, what kind of questions do students seem to use the calculator, put the answer, but then risk losing all the marks? So I'll give you 2 minutes to see if anyone can put any of the examples there. So, and then I'll mention a few myself. Great ideas coming through. Just to answer someone who mentioned about definite integrals. If you notice, a lot of the mark schemes actually show you that they have to do the integration and they have to show the substitution. So they have to actually show the subtraction between the upper bound and the lower bound. And if they fail to do that, they risk losing the marks as well. So I would encourage them to then use the calculator, see the final answer, and use as a verification process instead of just copying that down. In terms of what calculators are allowed or not allowed, as a point of reference for all our qualifications, any calculator that can solve or let's say simplify any algebraic expressions, that is not allowed. So they shouldn't. It should be more, or it should be numeric, in other words. And again, a lot of the things, even when you use solving tools on the calculator that are allowed, they're using a numerical method, which it kind of estimates it instead of an algebra. Now, a full list of what's allowed and not, you can find on the qualification website. We have a link. We have a link on our website as well, which kind of shows you which calculators are allowed and not allowed. But you have both scientific and graphic calculators are allowed for the international A level. It's just it shouldn't be able to modify or adapt an algebraic expression in any kind of way. That wouldn't be allowed in there. And we've got quite a few examples here. So if you look at what people have written. And in each case of that in the chat, the calculator is quite good to build confidence, and the calculators are quite good to verify and make the student feel. So I would encourage the use of it, but it's a good use of it, the effective use of it. A lot of the times when I teach in the class, I would consider, do I want the graphic calculator or in laptops or other technology to introduce something? If not, I will introduce it without it. Sometimes it's worth introducing with it because they can explore, come to conclusions themselves before we come to the algebraic method of proving why that's the case. And in other cases, we'll put the technology away, we'll do the maths ourselves, and then we'll come back and then explore and verify answers, and therefore train them on how to do that. But then I have to keep emphasizing, because some of my most able students seem to kind of omit the method marks, even though I keep saying the same thing all the time. So, but it's being aware of that and making sure that the questions as for use of technology, there are modules from Pearson with videos that you can go onto our qualification site, as well as YouTube with, if you put Pearson, where we talk and demonstrate where you can and cannot use technology. There's also reference to that. There's a marking module as well that you can follow through as well, and you can either join, download, or watch or read about the use of technology as well. So have a look at that online, and that should help you as well with different examples of that. Some further examples here that you should be aware of are listed on the screen. I'll give you a few minutes, well, a minute only to read it. And then and I'll mention solutions of trig equations, especially because some of the calculators that have a solve n kind of feature that just gives you all the estimates of the solutions. And if you just put them there, but it says like our question there, then they'll lose the marks. So that's, and again, definitely the integrals as well. Whether you're using the scientific one as well, where you put the bounds, again, it's making sure, and you keep reiterating to them that they have to. Same with the location of turning points as well. Some of them will put the graph on there, will actually use the calculator to give them, and they put that down. It's making sure they use it in the right way. So if I move on here, just to give you how the marks are given as well. So in this case here, we have a January 2023 paper from Pure 2. It's another equation that we're solving. And then if you take a moment to think about the sequence of processes that the student must take in this part here, you could share the steps as well. So it's making sure we show enough steps. I can take a graphic calculator and they have a feature. I'll put the equation, I'll get the final answers, but that's worth 5 marks. So I need to make sure my students show enough marks to get the method marks in this case here. Even though this part of the question doesn't specify that the calculators aren't used. So I'll give you a chance for thinking of that, and then I'll share a few of the things. So what kind of processes would you encourage your students to do first? Because if they just put the calculator, either the graph, or if they put the equation on and then just get the answers, they won't get the marks. What steps would we want to see? Give a minute if in case anyone's typing. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we can see if you have a look at the chat, we have a few things here. So it's changing it. We can see using the identities. Excellent. So a few more here. I can show you a few of the steps with encourage to see. So express the tan theta sine theta over cos theta, multiply through by cos theta, replacing sine squared theta by 1 minus cos squared theta, rewrite the equation as a 3-term quadratic in cos theta, solving the equation to find at least one value of cos theta and hence theta, and then find all the required values of theta. The marking must reflect this. There are 5 processes. There must be at least 1 accuracy mark for the final value. So you can then think about, so we need 1 for the final value, therefore gives us 4 other marks to then make sure that it then represents all the steps that you have to do. Some of those steps might be paired together. And just to get you familiar with that, we'll move on to our activity 3. So in our activity 3, which I'll put on again here, you will have a question and the processes, and I'd like you to think about which of them could be paired together, and then record the your mark on the response sheet. Okay, so if we look at our thing here, our delegate sheet as well. So activity 3 is in there. It's this one here. So there's the actual steps that we just shared on the screen. However, there's only 5 processes for 4 marks. Some of them should be joined and will be given 1 mark. So you won't get 1 for each of those processes here. So I'd like you to think about, would you put A and B together, B and C, C and D, or any other combination? So I'll give you about 3 minutes to have a think and join them together. And then I'll tell you what I did with them, or what the Maxim actually says for this one here. Give me a second. So give you 3 minutes to have a look at this.
Best of God.
So I can see people have said A and B on that one there. What I have in this one here, just looking at people, and before I show you, if I also put the mark schema here, and that kind of shows you that you have processes 1 and 2 are paired together. 3 stands on its own as given a mark. 4 also is there, which has to lead to the correct quadratic. And then process 5, you have it together either this way or this way, so they don't get 1 mark each. So you can see a few of you mentioned this as well. And then you get the final accuracy mark at the bottom here. So some of the procedures that you do are paired together and they're given 1 mark. So just by showing an additional one doesn't mean that you get as different marks, okay? So just have that in mind. That then takes us to activity 4 as well, and that's just to get you more familiar with this, which this one I'll give you slightly more time. So we've got the 2 questions given in activity 4, which I'll also put on the screen just so you could see as I'm referring to this. So if I move to activity 4. So we've got this question here, use the accompanying mark scheme to mark the question 8 from January 23, paper 2. So you've got students' work at the bottom here. So you'd have to make sure you open this sheet so you can read it. And then it says record your marks on the response sheet, which will be shared as well if you want to anonymously. So you can share on the chat if you want to, or you can give me some answers afterwards as well. You can make any comments. So you've got student A here, you've got student B's work here, and then the mark scheme's there. And then here would like you to tell us what marks you give for each question from if you can. So we've got the mark scheme, we've got student A and student B. And if you can then use the sheet afterwards to actually and try and mark it. So it gives you a bit of an exposure within the mark scheme as well as what we've just done now. So I would say another 5 minutes and then we can talk about this. And then I'll tell you also how the examiners gave the marks for each student. So 5 more minutes to just look at that. So I'll come back at 26, just rounding it to the next minute here, and then we'll talk about that. So have a look at the answers and see if you can distribute the marks accordingly.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, are you okay? Sorry.
Yeah, could you share the prior slide again about how you showed the breakdown of the marks?
So that's, yeah, okay, thanks. I've got a few questions that are coming up for the calculator. So I'll give you an example. This isn't promoting this specific model. It's just I have it currently on my laptop that I'm delivering the training from. So if I see if I can move it. So if you have a look, this is a graphic calculator. So in this case here, if I go onto the maths here, you can see I can find the gradient function. Well, I can find the gradient at a specific point. So I can then put, let's say, any expression here. And then if I say I want the gradient at a specific point, then it will then calculate and give it to me. Now, again, this is what we mean by earlier on, that you shouldn't, the answer in itself won't be awarded marks without the relevant method marks, especially when the question itself says that. The integral as well, the definite integral as well. So in this case here, you can put, again, an expression in there in the big box, put the bounds, and then it will also give you just the value. So long as it's just the value that gives you those, whether they're scientific or graphic, then they're allowed. I don't think I have the equivalent scientific one on this laptop here that I'm delivering with, otherwise I showed you that as well. And then there's some other features as well where I was talking about giving, if I did, bear with me, sorry, if I do calculate solve, and there's this feature on here where if I were to type in the original question, which was 2 tan theta, so if I put 2 tan theta, it's x right now, sine x equals, so if I just, and I'm not training or showing you, I'm just showing you what they can do in some cases, plus the 5, and then you then have to put in the domain, but you put the x first, and let's say we put it from 0 to 360. I didn't see what this question was, but just as an example, if I close the brackets here, this will come up telling you that there might be more solutions of what the calculator shows you, because you're using a numerical method to actually give you those values. And then again, if you then move up and click, you can see the answer. That's the first answer. That's that you have here. As you can see here, it's omitted this second one here, and that's why the error is there. Now, some students will use this alone, just put the final answer if they've been shown this. So this is a calculator is allowed. They could verify this. Because sometimes it's omitted, this is why I encourage them to use the graphic technology where they put that on. But again, just to verify. So any calculator that just has solutions and numerical values, not any expressions in any way, are allowed in there. There's a list of calculators allowed and not allowed on the JCQ website as well, and you can have a look at that if you'd like to. So at this point here, if we just have a quick look at what you would award each student. So I had the first one on there. This is from your resource pack as well. But if we have a look at the first person, some of you have mentioned 4 marks for the first one, 0 marks for the other one, 1 mark for the other one. But actually, this is how they gave the people, the students. So the first, so here we go. So they actually gave the first one 3 marks. They lost the method marks, so correct up to and including the quadratic equation in cos theta. The student never writes theta equals cos inverse, so we do not see the full process, so they lose the method and the accuracy mark in that case. The second student, they get 1 mark for the attempt to clear the fractions, 1 mark for using the sine squared equals sine squared theta equals to 1 minus cos squared theta to get an equation in cos theta, but no further math are given after that. So again, this is worth showing even with your students. It's worth sometimes even downloading a script like this from a student or a past student of yours. Getting the students to mark themselves is a nice technique. And so because then they start to value the importance of showing the working marks. And in some cases, they realize it's not just you being difficult for not giving them the marks, but actually this is what you have to follow the mark scheme, and then they can see the importance of clear structures, clear presentations, enough steps to support them, and therefore I would recommend the same task we did with the others as well. We did say, as it shows on as you can see from the screen here, the student never showed the cost inverse a third. So therefore, they don't see the full process. And that's because the mark scheme in itself, if I go back here, they require they require this step here before the answer in order to get the final marks. And the accuracy marks is only given if the method marks are given. If no method marks are required, then it's a B1 mark instead on the mark scheme. And that's something that you need to train your students, even if it sounds strict, that's to guarantee that they get the marks that they deserve within that, within each one. So to summarize, students will lose marks for all sorts of reasons, but there are some common errors which experienced teachers generally know about and teach the class accordingly. So in the previous activity, there were two main errors. And in those two, there were a considerable number of sign errors during the process, which led to the loss of the A mark for a correct quadratic. And then the second one was many only identified 70.5, like the calculator showed as well, again, and there was a noticeable lack of cast diagrams or graphs for the use of part of this question. So, and I encourage a lot of my students to take the actual graph from the graphic calculator, so they'll help them graph it, then they'll put some numbers on it, and that helps them with the method marks as well. So in this case here, we can have another look at maybe perhaps one more problem here, just to, so that was one question that we looked at. So we can have a look at another one and how marks are lost. So if we look at this one here, another typical case from a recent paper one. And if I give you a few minutes just to think about the errors that students can make and put any ideas on the chat as well, I'll have a look at it now. So I'll say just literally just 2 minutes to have a look at it and then discuss it. And then I'll share with you what the examiners also say about this before we end. So, and it's worthwhile I mentioned the examiner's report. The examiner's report are quite good at writing on what the typical mistakes are. And therefore, by taking that, you can then share that with your team or with the students as well. So give you 2 minutes, just have a look at the question and think about where could students lose marks typically in this question. So quite a few of you have mentioned about forgetting the C or the constant, as we say, in part B there. But however, confusing the pattern with, yep, so there's some confusion as well between differentiation and integration there as well. The index notation, I agree as well. At the domain of a function, yep. So there's different areas there that students can do. So this is what they've mentioned though in the examiner's report. So failing to add a constant in part B and making a sign slip when integrating. So even the signs there, and that's another a typical mistake that they saw within that. So it's worth when you download, if you go to the Maths Emporium or the qualification website, there is the marks and there is the paper, but there is also the examiner's report. Within that, examiners write the typical mistakes. This is a nice exercise for yourselves, but it's also a nice exercise with a few colleagues. This is also a nice exercise, as I said, with the students themselves. They have become more aware. If they go into your position where they have to mark someone else's paper, and they are then more critical, they then come to that realization. So therefore, because sometimes when we keep repeating ourselves, we become an echo. They're taking the responsibility for someone else and doing that. That means that they can then realize it and probably not forget it themselves either. Again, sorry for you can hear any background noise. I am in a school as I am delivering this, and it's currently their break as well. That concludes the activities that we have. And at this section here, I'm going to refer to different support that Pearson offers. And then again, I'll use some examples based on today's module. If you don't want to stay till the remaining of this, if you don't have any other questions or answers, you may go at this if you've heard it from the last session. It will be kind of applied to what we did today. That's the difference. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end as well, though. And then again, anyone who's mentioned about certificates, there is a link at an email as well. So you should be receiving this as an email. But there's also an email at the end of this slides here. That you can email directly as well if there's any issue in terms of names or if you don't receive it. So all resources that we currently have on our qualification website are grouped into 3: planning, teaching and learning, exam preparation and assessments, and the results plus. The resource support. And then we have different types of, for some of them we have advices, otherwise it's schemes of work, so, the sample assessment materials, and you can see a list of this, and you'll be able to find all this on our website as well. In terms of the actual website, it looks like this. So the website looks like this one here. You'll find the course materials on the side here. And then when you click on that, like I mentioned, it's split into 3.
Sorry, we cannot see your screen there. We still see your wording marks.
Okay, apologies. Let me have a look. Thank you for mentioning. So this was the grid. Can you see that now? Anyone gives a thumbs up, or is that working?
Yes, we can see it now.
Excellent, thank you. So split into 3 categories, as you can see on there. The website in itself is like this. If you just search online Pearson Qualification International Mathematics A-level, you'll come to this link here. You've got the course materials here. If you click on it, it's split into 3. We have quite a few resources locked so that students don't access them, especially the most recent ones, and that's so that you can use them as your mocks inside in your academic year. You can also see on the same website the email I'm referring to, which I'll also show on the picture. I'll put in the chat as well later on, and a number that you can call as well to reach us. And that's on the website there. As well as this is the Maths Emporium that all teachers that follow have part of the Pearson, have Pearson qualifications, can have free access where you can find other resources such as the bronze, silver, gold that I mentioned earlier on. And you can also find examiners' reports there. Now, the Results Plus is again a different website. The link is at the bottom. You can have access through the qualification side as well. It gives you access to the performance of your cohort as a year group, as a class, at a class level as well, and it shows you your strengths and areas of improvement. What I would do with my team based on this, I'll get every member of staff we have about 13 staff members in the maths department here, and each one of them will have a look at the strengths and areas of improvement. And then within here, they will reflect upon their teaching and the students they have. In some cases, it could be that we reflect and we need to share some ideas together of how we deliver it. It could be resources, it could be the approach, it could be the examples that we give on there. It could be the method that we might want to approach it in a different way when teaching it. It might be the use of technology to make them remember. So in some cases, I also look at my whole teams and I see if there's anything similar across the different groups. And if that's the case, we might do some discussion within our maths department meetings and might solve some maths together and discuss about the misconceptions themselves. Or the other thing, which I'm going to come to next as well, is to actually access some scripts and download them and actually remove the marks that the students got and ask my team to sit down and mark together. Whenever we do that, we find a lot of inconsistencies between us. And that's because of those, like you've done here, where the judgment, you're basing it on a logical judgment, and there is some leniency and a difference, but we have to get aligned with what the examiners will do. So there's some of those tasks we'll do after the exam series, after we get the results, but some of the times we'll also do that as a standardization task before students see a mock exam. And that's so that we can then align that. So if, for example, we use the 2023 paper as our mocks, I will download some of those scripts, I will remove them, and I'll get them to mark together. And I will do that during the round table together. We'll mark a few examples, not the whole paper. And in that case, we'll then start discussing and sharing whether we gave the same marks. And then at that point, we will decide why we gave those marks, why not, and then what the examiner says. If we want to understand a bit more why the examiner gave certain marks, the examiner report will also be useful. If you want a proper training session on how to mark, and I'm talking about so that we can get the whole team aligned, there's also some resources on the qualification websites where it refers to marking, because they've been done before, on the Maths Emporium as well, which you can download. And then there's some where you actually get a note for each of those questions. So the results plus shows for your own results here, and it helps you develop, and in terms of developmental and also avoiding similar issues year on year. But in terms of more resources like that, they're on our Maths Emporium and qualification website as well. And I do recommend them. We find them quite useful because then we're very similar in our marking and we know what to expect as well when it comes to the examinations. The other one is the Exam Wizard. And now it's worth noting now when you develop your own bespoke assessments or worksheets or anything kind of thing like that, as mentioned earlier on, make sure that you follow, you have in mind, not just the specification now, not just how worded the question is, but the assessment objectives as well. Assessment objective 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and have that in mind about when you choose the questions. You'll also have a natural feeling with this, because the harder they get, the more context they have, there's a higher demand as well. So the Exam Wizard is a great tool, which is also free to use as well. Again, apologies for the noise. They're now returning back to their classrooms for the next lesson, so you might hear some of that noise. I did mention on the access to scripts earlier on. Again, that's through the, you can access that using the Edexcel online website. Again, if you have any issues with this, it's worth talking to your exam officer as well. That might give you access to the different ones, because they should be using a lot of these websites, not the scripts, but the exam online website for the exam purposes as well. So they could help you, guide you through accessing this the scripts as well. We do recommend, we do say it's worth you getting the permission from the students as well to download their own scripts. You can do that either by asking them on the day or by making a letter from your school and giving it to them. There are plenty of resources that will help you deliver the international A-level. Some of them are online as well, active books. Whether you use the Pearson books or any other publisher, that's also that's also allowed. But what I would suggest is you do a mapping and have a look, because how the specification and the weighting of the questions that are given, the frequency within the past papers against what the standard and the demand within the textbooks before you make a large order of books. So it's more about making sure that the weight that they do, the demand of the questions are similar or above the real exams. You don't want to be under preparing a student because the textbook doesn't meet the challenge of the exams. So they're published and online resources, like I mentioned earlier on. This is the contact I mentioned, and I'll put the email. I will put the email in the chat. So if I put this here, so that is the email that you can contact if you have any other query specific to your school. And then we'll try and help you. Mark Heslop is also one of our subject specialists who supports different schools internationally as well. And there's a telephone number as well that you can contact us. At this point here, if anyone, I will stay another 10 minutes in the background to answer any specific questions. But if you're not staying, if you don't have any questions, thank you very much for joining us. My name is Melios Michael. As I said, I'm one of the credible specialists for Pearson, and we'd be happy to support you with any queries as well. Feel free to send those emails. And if you have any queries specifically on this that you come across, just reference my name, the course that you've done, and send it to that email, and they'll also approach me as well for any queries. Thank you very much for joining. I'll be in the background for 10 minutes answering any specific questions. Thank you.